She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frock, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For cockcrow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cockcrow, dagabag, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Cockcrow, dagabag, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. All day a back down, me now a come home. Inaga jackass yard for fetchy load. Cockle shy hand, bag over shoulder, running by his side, a Rexy and Rover. From the farm, them a come. Sun a go down but up the river. Some washing clothes, some folks are bathing at the water. Fisherman, they catch them a bring. From a canoe boat, man, them start offloading. Aymara, Kwakwari, Gale Baka, Kuma, even Lokunani. Aymara, Kwakwari, Gale Baka, Kuma, even Banga Mary. Listen to this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. Them children glad when the weekend come. Out in the yard, them all gather round. Some a play catcher, some making house from straw. Two who come later, a grandma or grandpa. All a sit down just a wait. Moonlight so bright, it's just the right time to listen story or to say a little nursery rhyme. Grandpa voice a echo in the night as he tell some picnic are there with fright. Oh Ligan, Mungeza, Massa Kurma Burra Nancy, even Watamuma. Oh Ligan, Mungeza, Massa.
So, this is attorney Shellen Washington, owner and founder of the Washington Law Firm, located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. We're specialized in medical malpractice, personal injuries, matrimonial law, and landlord and tenant. If you're in need of legal representation, please give us a call today. The number to call is 718-877-3100. Consultation is free at no cost to you. So call us today to see if we can be of any assistance to your legal needs. Again, the phone number to call us is 718-877-3100.
If you are looking to have your statutory declaration, affidavit of income, identity, damage or lost passport, lost license, tenancy agreement, agreement of settlement, power of attorney, last will and testament, and certification of documents, then you need to visit the Alistair Collins firm, located at the Killian Mall, 162 Lamaha Street, in Georgetown, between Camp and Waterloo Street. Alistair Collins is a commissioner of oaths and a justice of the peace. Make certain you visit him or call for more information at 649-6410 or 685-6448 or 503-1451. And there's adequate parking available. Go down to the Alistair Collins firm and have all of your legal issues settled and brought to the fore. Alistair Collins firm, Contact them at Alistair Collins Firm.
All right. Hey, guess what? Good evening and welcome to Straight Up. My name is Mark Benchap. Thank you guys for tuning in. And thanks to Sherrod Duncan on the other side of the studio doing his thing. One of the things that's troubling that Sherrod has been suspended for 4 sittings from the National Assembly. It simply means he cannot go there for 4 successive sittings. And during that time, guess what? Sherrod Duncan will be broke, meaning, of course, that he wouldn't be paid. Something is wrong. Something is wrong with that. But guess what? The leader of the PNCR, the People's National Congress Reform, Aubrey Norton, is here with me this evening. But before we get to Mr. Norton, let me just give you guys 30 seconds to share the link and welcome all of you. Some of you may be new viewers or listeners. Lots of things are happening in Guyana. Lots of things indeed. And Aubrey Norton, the leader of the PNCR, is here to talk about a lot of those issues as well and what he plans on doing as the new leader of the People's National Congress Reform. So get your popcorn, get whatever else you want to get, because it's going to be a smooth ride. A smooth ride indeed, because I got some questions to Mr. Norton. Some nice questions, some soft questions, and some not so soft questions. But one of the things I give Norton credit for, Mr. Norton credit for, is he has never asked for a list of the questions. In fact, I don't do that to most of my guests, but if they ask, I don't have a problem telling them what areas I will be touching. And so kudos to Aubrey Norton for not asking about the questions. And so if our operator, Andrew, can you get Mr. Norton from Studio B for us, please? Let's get ready to rock and roll. Mr. Norton, good evening and welcome to Straight Up, sir.
Having me, and a good evening to your viewing and listening audience, wherever they are.
Oh, they're all over Guyana, all over the Caribbean, wherever else they are. Good evening to all of you. This is your first time back on the show since you have been elected as leader of the People's National Congress Reform. Let me take this opportunity to congratulate you, sir. You're welcome. I've noticed that you've been busy hitting the ground. What have you discovered whilst hitting the ground, sir?
Well, there are a number of things that are obvious when you are on the ground. First of all, a lot of our supporters have complained about the police or elements in the Ghana police force who are moving around, incarcerating people for 72 hours when there's no reasonable suspicion of a crime. That is one of the issues that is regularly raised as we move around. Another issue that is raised is this whole question of a lot of our support base not accessing the resources that the government is purporting to deliver to people. And many of them have identified the discriminatory nature of what the government is doing. They also bemoan the fact that the cost of living is extremely high, and they do not see wages and salaries increasing in keeping with the kind of increases you're seeing in the cost of living. They are deeply concerned that while the government speaks about improving the lives of the people, their lives are deteriorating because by the time the government announced whatever little increase they would announce, almost immediately the prices will double. And so the real wage of the worker is declining, though the nominal wage appears to be on the increase. So cost of living is a concern. There's also among our people involved in NDCs and regional democratic organs that the People's Progressive Party seems to want to dominate and control those NDCs and RDCs, and they are not allowing the elected representatives of the people to govern those areas. When we were in government, we allowed them to govern, and now they seem to believe that they should be governing the NDCs and RDCs won by the AP and UAFC. So that is also a question. I think people are also concerned about the amount of lies that are being told about the benefits they are getting. In Linden recently, people expressed concern that while the government claims to be delivering resources to Linden, they have abandoned the plan for a new river, a new bridge across the Demerara River in the Linden area. What I found interesting about this is that here you are talking about the road from Mabura to Linden. You want to bring a road that is probably 2 lane, 4 lane, but you have a 1 lane bridge, and you don't see the need to have this bridge done. It points to the myopic thinking of the People's Progressive Party. They clearly lack a vision for Region 10 in general and Linden in particular. Because were they concerned and wanted to see growth in Linden, then they would have, apart from talking about the road, which years ago they said they will never build. So we're glad that they're saying now they will build it. And but we are worried that there's going to be a bottleneck when you meet at the Linden, the Wisma Mackenzie Bridge, because it continues to be a 1 lane bridge, and you're talking about an increase in traffic out of the Rupununi, out of Brazil. And so for many people in Linden, the government seems not to care about the people of Linden. In fact, many of them have accepted that the government's approach is to seek to make them dependent by a few handouts, while at the same time giving a lot of resources to the people in the People's Progressive Party. In one case, they are paying exorbitant sums for a PPP man bond. They have decided that they will not build a regional Democratic Council office in Region 10. So one sees the facade of appearing to want to help Linden, but in reality, the things they are doing are clearly aimed at suffocating or asphyxiating Linden. So those are some of the issues. There are many more. A lot of the farmers, when I was in the Bacalus, the farmers complained that the Minister of Agriculture had promised them that he will do the middle road leading to their farms so that they can have a proper farm to market road. That turned out to be just hot air coming from the mouth of a PPP minister, because until now it continues to be one of the worst roads in the Bacalus and no action is taken. Victoria had a similar complaint in terms of doing the roads, etc. You would recall that when we were in government, we placed a lot of these villages back into agriculture by doing the drainage and irrigation so that they can plant, etc. And we again not seeing the focus that is needed to help them to continue to farm and to feed their families, etc. So there are a lot of concerns that are raised across. It depends on the village you're in.
Depends on the village you're in. If you're now joining us, leader of the PNCR, Mr. Aubrey Compton Norton is with us this evening. Speaking of the roads and the villages, Mr. Norton said it depends on the villages that you're in, Navacalis, Victoria. But let us take you guys to Blackbush Polder. Look at what's happening there. Blackbush Polder, indeed, all over seem to be miserable. In terms of conditions of the roads and so forth. But Mr. Norton, let's get to this before we move on to other issues. Curfew lifted. Lots of people seem to believe that that's an irresponsible move by this regime. Your take, sir?
Well, I would have looked at it holistically. Have they lifted only the curfew, or they lift the number of people that could assemble. Look, I have long argued that the PPP wants to use COVID as a tool of repression, but they had this dilemma of being linked to the private sector, and the private sector doesn't want curfew, etc., because in their perception, it will affect their business. The People's Progressive Party has mismanaged COVID. They've shown a lack of ability to develop a comprehensive plan to deal with COVID. They've shown an inability to implement the rules of COVID across the board in an even handed way. And so, COVID, as far as I'm concerned, was never handled by the People's Progressive Party as a pandemic that they need to address and to solve the problems. I don't only think it is irresponsible. I think it is also an indication of who they support and who they're interested in. The People's Progressive Party seems interested in only its elite, its family and friends making money and enjoying the fruits of the society. And so one would have expected that they would have taken a more responsible approach, look at COVID in a comprehensive way. First of all, take the measures that will ensure the protection of our people, and then develop a plan to gradually ease the restrictions, etc., and bring Guyana back to normalcy. I think they are just going down the road of acting on impulse and at the behest of those who control them. And so we ended up with a lifted curfew. I have not seen the gazetted order to see if they remove the restrictions on on the amount of people that will assemble. And I doubt they would want to do that because they know almost immediately people can hold political meetings and rally against the ills that they are undertaking in the society. I'm hoping that I will be able to read the entire Gazette and then to do a comprehensive analysis of what is their intention and how is it they are operating. But I see the lifting of the curfew as very much linked to the demands of the business sector that wants the curfew to be lifted at all costs. And in some regard, the lifting of the curfew is just a formality. A lot of the businesses linked to the People's Progressive Party were holding parties, etc., way into the morning. Let us not forget the lawlessness that they permitted over the holidays with Kashif and Shanghai, having a tournament and paying no attention to the task force rules. And then they put the prime minister say they were disappointed and let down by them. They were not disappointed and let down by them. They knew full well what they were doing. They knew that they put no mechanism in place to control what was happening. And so they allowed them to do what they wanted to do and then try to appear as if they were reasonable by saying that they let them down. They didn't let them down. They was part of the plot.
Part of the plot, indeed. Mr. Norton, let's go back to 2011. When you were in Parliament, the PPP accused you, Mr. Norton, of being disrespectful. God in heaven knows for what. The then Speaker was Mr. Ralph Ramkaran. And now let's fast forward. In 2022, the same sort of attitude by the PPP, who is in no position to talk about whoever is being disrespectful. They have been more than disrespectful to Parliament and the people of Guyana. But what happened to you in 2011? You were not suspended or anything for several sessions, not even for one session, but they've accused you of being disrespectful. Now, Sharon Duncan, a member of Parliament, the same accusation of being disrespectful. We all saw it. For good reasons, he stood up and defended his colleague, a female colleague in Parliament. What is your take on Sharon Duncan's, suspension of 4 sessions?
First of all, one has to understand that the Speaker of the House, Mr. Manzoor Nadir, is a partisan. He fails to even manifest some modicum of interest in being impartial. Like I said in an earlier interview today, you know, all Manzu needs to do is to go in the PPP benches and do what he's doing because he operates solely in the interests of the PPP. He is non-responsive to the concerns of the APNU AFC. Many of the motions, etc., they brought, he failed to table them throughout the issue with the Natural Resource Fund. He was clearly a partisan, and I've argued that he created conditions propitious to the behavior that occurred in the National Assembly. Now, when it comes to the incident in Parliament, I thought Sherrod was correct since the Speaker didn't reprimand Dharam Lal, who I thought was disrespectful to females. But you know, one of the views I hold about Dharam Lal is that he seems to lack the basics in civility. And so one can expect something like that from him. He does not come over as someone who thinks logically and has an interest in decency. But the real problem lies with the speaker, who, rather than reprimanding him, the speaker tends to agree with everything that is done by the People's Progressive members of parliament, even if they are in contravention of the basic decorum of the National Assembly. And so when he suspended Sherrod Duncan, I wasn't surprised. He's the kind of speaker who believes that the PPP could do what they like. But when it comes to the APNU AFC, they have to live by the rules. And so you don't have a speaker in the National Assembly in the genuine sense of it. You have a PPP participant and partisan masquerading as a speaker who should be impartial. And that's the reality. And I think it is that kind of approach that led to Sherrod Duncan being suspended. But even though Sherrod is suspended, he continues to do the good work on in the ring. People will listen, and people will recognize that is also an attempt to silence Sherrod. I think the PPP is very uncomfortable with the work that he does. Little wonder, therefore, that they proceeded to trump up charges against him about cybercrime when, you know, there are other crimes to be investigated. I've just called for an investigation into the allegations against Vice President Barajak Deo, who I pointed out tonight specializes in mendaciousness, in the sense that he lied about Amelia's ward, he lied about the state of the economy. He was dishonest about a number of things in that interview. And while he was accusing the journalist of not knowing a lot about Guyana, he was using the fact that she didn't know a lot about Guyana to peddle his misinformation and what I would call things that were distant from the truth. That is the reality.
Lots of things distant from the truth coming from the regime, indeed. Mr. Norton, let's touch on racism. Yes, racism. 2 years ago, you accused, and rightfully so, the PPPC regime, Irfan Ali's regime, of being practicing racism and discrimination, mainly against persons of African descent. He said that you were being reckless and your statement was without any basis, any facts, and it was horrible. Now, what are some of the examples of racism and discrimination being practiced under this installed regime, sir?
Well, I did at the time when Irfan Ali made his misguided statements. I pointed out to him then that, look, you were saying when you were in opposition that when you come to power, anybody who got contracts, lands, etc., under the APNU AFC, you would have asked them to either repay or repossess the land. It turned out when they actually came to power, though a lot of lands were issued to Indo-Guyanese while the APNU AFC was in government, he only proceeded to go after the African businessmen. Sevon, Bransford, there were a number of them who actually gave back some, decided they will fight them in the court, and they won. And I think that is an indication of how discriminatory the PPP was and are in nature. We also pointed out how they handled the COVID relief, where they began by saying it will be given to all households. They did that in PPP areas, but when they arrive in areas that are supportive of the APNU AFC, they proceeded to say that people had got to prove that they own the house. They shifted from household to ownership of property when they were dealing with African Guyanese communities. While when they were dealing with the Indo Guyanese community, they just allow people to produce an ID card, etc. And in cases where Indo Guyanese were considered APNU AFC, they discriminated against them. They did the same thing with the indigenous people. So the People's Progressive Party has shown that they are discriminatory in nature. Right now, I have some work going on which will establish how discriminatory in nature they are. I wouldn't disclose it, the work will continue, but shortly we'll be able to give actual data on the People's Progressive Party penchant, their likeness for discriminating against African Guyanese and Indo Guyanese, indigenous Guyanese, who they perceive to be APNU AFC. And if you look at the budget, you will see discrimination again. They have reduced funding to region 7, 4, and 10, which are the regions that were won by the APNU AFC. They are paying their regional chair, vice chair. But in the case of the vice chair in Bartica, who they are hassling, they refuse to pay her what she's entitled to, including, I think, her 7% increase as a result of the last increases. They seem to be saying to this young woman, you're Indo Guyanese, you're supporting the wrong political movement, and therefore we'll put pressure on you till you abide by the rules. But then they have a man from the prime minister office doing all kinds of nonsense in Bartica. You have one who is some Bella or boat, I don't know which one it is, but he seems to believe that they have the right to do what they like against the people of Bartica. You then have the police who have been incarcerating people under their instructions in some regard. And all of these issues we have to confront. The PPP has shown that they are discriminatory in their practices and it has to be confronted. And I want it to be made very clear that it is both ethnic and political discrimination.
Ethnic and political discrimination, just to remind our listeners and viewers on the ground in Guyana and those in social media, that over 3,000 persons from the public service have been terminated. Their jobs have been terminated, compliments of the PPP regime. Mr. Norton, let's move on to some other stuff. Hot on the news all over is the treatment of a Vice News reporter by the name of Isabella Young, and the disrespect of that reporter, all because she touched a nerve on, or Jack Dave's nerve and Irfan as well. Why do you suppose that such allegations, serious allegations of corruption leveled against Mr. Jack Dale, that the police through SOCU has not stepped in?
Because there is no rule of law in Guyana. There is no longer a situation where people commit a crime, particularly People's Progressive Party people, or it is alleged they commit a crime. Let's assume such an allegation was made against Sherrod or Roysdale. They would have incarcerated them for 72 hours without one shred of evidence. Now, I think Jack Dio has a problem. He accustomed himself to speaking to people who he control and can direct the questions they ask. People like Critic, and there's nothing in his name that makes sense because he's critical of nothing. I think he lacks the capacity to be critical. And so what he does is he allow journalists are friendly to the PPP to interview him. And so he's accustomed to dictating the narrative and deciding what people would ask. He has come into contact with a professional journalist who did the research, who has information on him. And so he was unnerved. When you look at the video, you saw that he started to stutter. He's not generally fluent, but he's a little more fluent than what he was when the question was asked. He reached for a bottle of water to have a drink, I think, to stabilize the nerve that was affected. And so I think it is really a reflection of a man who is accustomed to dictating to journalists, to dictating to the media, being for the first time in a long time questioned by a journalist that he has absolutely no control over. And so he ran into problems. And by the time he caught himself and to just say it is not true, he had already manifested the tendencies of guilt if one looked at his biological being and his actions. And so I think it is clearly a case of a man who is accustomed to deciding who asks him what, when they ask him, and how they ask him, being asked questions that he wasn't prepared for. And in fact, like the journalist said, it would have touched a nerve. And so he became nervous.
Became very nervous. We'll take a quick 1 minute break. We just want our listeners to take a look at or listen to what Jack Dave said and his response, his facial expression, his bottle of water, and all these things. And we'll be back with more questions to the leader of the People's National Congress Reform, Aubrey Compton Norton. We'll be right back.
Source.
Okay, well,
Maybe the Chinese company that did not get the agreement that they wanted here, maybe they're the ones who told you, or it could be just a fictitious thing.
Okay, well, let's talk about specific individuals. What is your relationship with Mr. Su Jerome?
So my relationship, nothing. He's a tenant in my place. Yeah.
And he's a good friend of yours?
Yes. Yes. He is a friend of ours. His father was here from many years ago.
I mean, he lives next door to you.
Yes.
You know, he was able to arrange meetings and catch-ups with you at any point in the day. He claims
As a friend.
You know, Mr. Norton, we saw that. The world saw it. All of Guyana, who were people who were paying attention, saw that. And lots of people can read between the lines. They know exactly what has happened there. He was caught off guard. Do you think that with the allegations leveled and the haste in which Jack Dave went to have or come out to say that Sue said that it is not true, and then mere minutes or hours after Sue said that it is not true, is anything going to come out of this, sir?
Well, it depends on what the journalist has. I don't believe a journalist will ask a question like that, a professional journalist, with some amount of evidence and a willingness to back it up at some stage. I would wait the outcome of the video or the documentary they are producing. And when I see the documentary, I will be able to say to you, but I do not believe a journalist will go asking those questions without having done the research before and have some reasonable amount of evidence that the questions are based on. And if one looked at the reaction of Jack Dale, one will see that he didn't manifest confidence. If I was asked if I was taking a bribe, I could say no. I don't have to bother an eyelid because I know it isn't true. But the minute you have to kind of prevaricate and seem not sure and dancing away from it, you yourself tend to portray that there is more in the martyr than the pistol.
Let me just quickly, since this was not part of what I wanted to ask you, but in the haste in which the Canadian ambassador rushed to even defend, my interpretation, defend Mr. Su and Chinese businesses in Guyana, were you surprised at this?
Well, I don't know that he defended it. I think he did what any mission will do. Now, the Chinese embassy in Guyana has to protect the government. There are contracts that emerge with government entities. The Chinese embassy in Guyana is also required to protect its citizens and do everything to ensure the lives of the citizens in Guyana, their lives are comfortable and their rights are not violated, etc. And I think what the Chinese embassy did is really to say, look, we are in a government, we're in business, and distancing themselves from anything about a bribe, etc., which I think any mission would do. But the reality will come out and we will know whether it is true or not. But I think the Chinese embassy in Ghana is just doing its job. When the PPP regime, who I believe had made an agreement with the Americans to recognize Taiwan while they wanted power, and when they were not telling the world that they planned to recognize Taiwan, the United States Embassy went out and told the world. And since they were already in power and they didn't have to honor their obligation, what Jack Dewey did is throw Todd under the bus. But most people will know that Todd is in no position to make a decision of that kind on his own. And so I think having used this issue of Taiwan and promising to recognize them, etc., and to set up a mission here to get political power. Because remember, it was the era of Donald Trump and they were promoting Taiwan. And so, what in essence happened is that I am of the view that they did make an arrangement, but having come to government and having recognized a certain amount of dependence on the Chinese, and that the Chinese had tools at their disposal that they could use, they decided they will retreat and said they were committed to the one China policy. So I see it as just political games. But in essence, I believe that they made a deal, it backfired on them, and then they retreated from their position after the Chinese took a firm position, which I think the Chinese had a right to take. We have had a one China policy for a while, and it should not have been handled in such a cavalier fashion. And unfortunate for Todd, he found himself under the bus. Correctly so, if you don't stand up.
The one China policy has been in existence for a while. Were you the president of Guyana, what would have been your government's position as it relates to Taiwan?
Well, first of all, one has to recognize that the People's National Congress in those days were in the forefront of recognizing China. And one has to put it into context. Let us understand that we recognized China and Cuba in 1972. When China and Cuba were recognized, you had before the vicious Cold War ongoing, but then the United States itself had developed a rapprochement with China and began to speak to China. And then the question became, why should the US be able to speak to China? I don't remember if it was President Bush or Nixon, but one of those presidents actually engaged China. They developed a rapprochement. And so Guyana at the time felt disposed to engage in China. When you are a country, you have to analyze the situation. China was an emerging market since then. China, there was potential with China. And so Guyana at the time engaged, recognized China, and began to develop good relationships with China. Now, we live in a world now in which America is a power, China is a power. What we have to do is to eke out our interests amidst the powers, ensure that we do what is required in Guyana's interest, benefit from it, while at the same time maintaining cordial relationship with both the United States and China.
All right. I believe it was in 1972 when you're correct, President Nixon, before he waved goodbye to his presidency, visited China. All right. We want to move away from that for now. And let's welcome some of the new folks who have joined us this evening. Mr. Aubrey Norton, our guest, the People's National Congress Reform leader. Let's walk into GCOM now. Lots of problems, tremendous amount of problems. You have been advocating for a new voters list, cleansing of the list, and all these different things. A new chief elections officer was appointed under controversial circumstances. Lots of things happening. Have you been in touch with the leadership of GCOM, and have you decided to meet with them to iron out these differences, sir?
Well, first of all, in my approach, I will first I'm engaging regularly our commissioners on GCOM. We have to analyze all the issues and then be clear and on one page on those issues. And this here is from the PNC standpoint. Since we want a functioning coalition, we will engage the APNU. And once we have positions of the APNU will then engage the AFC. And then the APNU AFC, we will be able to act in unison to deal with the situation at GCOM. We are clear as the PNC, and I'm sure that the APNU and the AFC are on board in the sense that we all believe that we need a clean voters list, that you cannot go to elections with the existing list. And while they are talking about going to continuous registration, which we have to monitor because we don't allow them to do the things they are doing. We are aware, for instance, that at the birth certificate office, they are issuing birth certificates without proper documentation, which to me appears to be another mechanism to rig. I think they start to smell the tea leaves that by the next election, they will no longer be there, that a large section of the Guyanese population, in fact, more than 50%, are now fed up with them. They have not honored many of the promises they made when they were fighting for power. And so they are now in a real dilemma. And therefore, I believe that they are seeking to manipulate the situation to be able to rig an election so that they can stay in power. It is in that context, therefore, we will do everything to ensure that there is a clean voters list and that the list reflect the reality than what it is now. Now, if you do continuous registration and you cannot take dead people and so off of the list properly, the list will move from 664,000 to about 700,000. If you have a population of 750,000 people and you end up with a list that is increasing all the time, you're making a mockery of democracy. One of the fundamental things about democracy is that election is part of the procedural aspect of democracy, and its aim is to have people go to the polls and reflect the will of the people. If you have a bloated list, a list that isn't clean, it wouldn't reflect the will of the people. And when the next elections are held, the controversies that existed over the last election will only grow in magnitude. And so I think logically, if the People's Progressive Party has an interest in Guyana, its stability and its development, it will agree to a clean voters list so we could create the conditions that are necessary for a free and fair election and remove the doubts that are swirling around that the People's Progressive Party has a plan to rig the next election so that they can stay in power. So we will have to address the question of the list, and we have to address the question of the independence of the Elections Commission. And once we put those issues together, we will meet with GCOM and clearly articulate our position on the issue. In fact, I've heard the vice president saying that they're willing to engage me if I become the leader of the opposition. And I heard Mark Phillips parroting the same thing. I have said in clear terms, engagement will first of all demand that we have a clean voters list because that's a priority. We have to work towards an independent elections commission, and then we can deal with the other issues because fundamental to a democratic society is elections. And if we do not get it right on elections, then we threaten the very fabric of what purports to be democracy in Guyana.
For 20 something years, the PPP, whilst in office from October 5th, 1992, they've held one local government elections. One. The APNU AFC got into office, not installed, they got into office through a democratic and transparent process. Just thought I'd make that clear. They have held two elections, the APNU AFC government, two local government elections. The PPP for 20 something years held one. Are you seeing this trait that they have, that they are scared or they just do not believe in local government elections?
They do not believe. They do not believe in local democracy. The fact that Minister Dharamlal is seeking to tell NDCs what to do with the money they give to them and actually using overseers to direct it and control it suggests that there's no interest in democracy, local democracy. If you listen to Dharamlal, you will hear a man that is obsessed with domination and control and not a man who believes that people have the right to elect their own councils and that those councils have the right to govern in the interest of the people. When you look at what he does at the level of the Regional Democratic Council, we see the same thing. I believe that one of the reasons that they are talking about local government election is not an interest in local government election, is an interest in using the existing voters list to test the waters, to see if it will be accepted, and then to argue later that we use it for the local government election, why we don't use it for the national election. So I see it as part of the political maneuvers to keep the existing list rather than having a clean voters list, and that will face considerable opposition. But I am convinced that the People's Progressive Party has no interest in local democracy. If you look at the NDCs they control, once people in those NDCs challenge what they're doing, they right away move to dominate and control and sometimes get rid of the people. The People's Progressive Party has not even shown an interest in democracy in its own party. Look, had there been a free and fair elections in the PPP, you believe that Irfan Ali, who shows a marked inability to pronounce words and show intellectual capacity, would have been elected leader of the PPP? I don't think so. But because Jack Dale dominates and controls and asphyxiates democracy and imposes his will, you have what happened there. And so it is not only in the area of local democracy. The very nature of the operations of the PPP is antithetical to democracy. And so for them, democracy is a slogan, not a process by which people are involved and make decisions. And so I am not at all sanguine that the PPP has an interest in local government. They have an interest in mechanisms for dominate and control, and they fit all the other things into that scheme. And whatever is useful in this wider scheme of domination and control will be used as a conduit towards eventually dominating and controlling the entire society, including the police force, which it has politicized and has been using to trump up charges against people without evidence. And so you see all the tendencies in the PPP as being dictatorial in nature. We're saying both in the PNCR and the APNU AFC, we are going to offer the people of Guyana good governance. We will allow them to govern the NDCs and RDCs they would have won and practice democracy and allow the people of this country to have a say. The only problem Jack Deo had with the journalist, he didn't have the tools at his disposal to repress her. If he had that, I don't think she would have been able to do the things she did.
Absolutely. If he had that, he probably would have done even more, jailing and all manner of things. Mr. Norton, we saw when Mr. James, retired Justice Patterson, was the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission, lots and back and forth and all manner of things. In 2011, you did say that if the leader of the opposition fails to submit a list of nominees to the president, then by law, the president has the right to make a choice, albeit that person should be someone with judicial experience, judge. Do you foresee this sort of back and forth happening again once Claudette Singh demits office?
Yes, there will always be back and forth. The PPP will bent on getting somebody that they could control and dominate, and we will be bent on putting somebody who's independent of the political system. So I anticipate a back and forth. I don't believe it's ever going to be a smooth process. However, we could reduce some of that if we take some measures to deal with some things in the Election Commission. For instance, I do not believe the chairman should have a casting vote on something like the appointment of the chief elections officer. It should be by consensus of the parties. Because once a chairman shows a tendency towards one side or the other, you will have problems identifying an independent person. But if one has to negotiate and arrive at one that is acceptable to both sides, you're more likely to get somebody that is closely resembling what independence is rather than what we have now.
Oil, billions of dollars, billions of barrels of oil shipped out of Guyana. Most Guyanese are complaining that they're not even getting crumbs. Were you in office as president of the country, what would you have done in order to renegotiate the contracts for Guyanese to get a better portion of the oil deal? What would be your approach, sir?
Now, first of all, let us start where it matters. One can talk about a renegotiation of the contract. Put that aside. The issue for me right now is that we are having oil. We are benefiting from it, but are the people benefiting? No, they are not. We have seen growth in the economy of over 47%, but we have not seen a budget that gave resources to 60% of this population. We have not seen a budget that raises the threshold so that people earning 125,000 or more would carry the a larger sum of money home. We have not seen a situation where pensioners who are now getting a meager $3,000, there's no reason why we couldn't increase the pension by $20,000. And so the first issue we need to tangle with is to put the mechanisms in place to ensure whatever oil resources come to this society, the people benefit. A lot of research has shown that where the people get more than 30 to 40% of the earnings, the society tend to do better and be stable. When it is way below, the society heads in the wrong direction. And I submit that is where we are headed. As it relates to the contract, the laws of Guyana are clear. We should ensure that the people of Guyana benefit. What I will do is to pursue mechanisms to ensure we increase the benefits of the people of Guyana while at the same time operating within the confines of the contract to make what changes are needed.
What are some of the changes as you see what's happening with Exxon and how the people of Guyana are crying out? Most Guyanese, if not all, are crying out about a raw deal. What are some of the changes you think that should be made
First of
given
all,
some?
I would want to see Exxon treat Guyanese workers properly. There are too many complaints. Secondly, I believe that the workers with Exxon should get higher wages and salaries if one look at the margin that they are likely, the profits they are likely to make. And so one of the first things for me would be to push in the direction of better wages and salaries and better treatment of Guyanese workers there. Then, secondly, it is one thing to say local content, but then you have to develop the capacity to benefit from local content. And I don't believe enough is being done to benefit from local content. You know, we have arrived right back at local content where we say now this is the amount that the Guyanese should get and benefit. Forbes Burnham said that years ago in different language. And many of the people that are talking now were very vicious against him, talking about us benefiting from the resources we have. But that is the nature of politics. Then I would like to see us put measures. They talk about ring fencing and a number of other measures that will help us to benefit. We could also negotiate for increased royalties. Um, I think that is an option. But we will have to engage Exxon. And I think we also need to recognize that in the developed world, um, developed countries, including the United States, are seeking to get better benefits from their multinational corporations. And we also need to work with them to say to them that they need to say to the corporate entity that just like how the people in the United States need to benefit from what they're doing, the people of Guyana and other countries need to benefit. Many people are running on the road of saying renegotiate the contract, um, but I think a lot needs to be done to ensure that the people of Guyana benefit. And I will focus in keeping with the original act of 1979, which says essentially our resources should be managed in a way that the people of Guyana benefit. I'll put the people of Guyana first, and the methodologies we will deal with as we go along.
All right, the people of Guyana, they have rejected the 2% royalty. You have even hinted at that it should be more. What would be a reasonable percentage of royalty for Guyanese?
It is not something I want to comment on. I have engaged a number of people in the field, and I do not want to make wild pronouncements. I will say to you truthfully, it is not an issue that I have addressed with the people who I'm speaking with that advise me. And now that you raise it, I will address it in the future and be in a better position to say to you, this is what I think. But I don't like pulling things from the heart, speculating and fooling people when in essence it is not an issue I would have addressed. And I'm saying to you, I didn't address it and therefore wouldn't be prepared to go down the road of saying, what is it that I expect?
Fair enough. Has there been any meetings with or a meeting with the executives of Exxon in the country since you've been
No,
elected leader?
not as yet. I have not met the leadership of Exxon as yet.
A couple months back, we heard of this auditing of billions of dollars of which taxpayers have to pay back to Exxon. Uh, we heard Mr. Jack Dale and Irfan Ali talked about this audit. To date, nothing at all. Are you concerned, sir?
First of all, I knew they can do nothing. They have done nothing to increase Guyana's capacity to do the audit. When we left government, we were training people at the EPA to be able to do proper environmental assessments, etc. They have discontinued that training and they are deprofessionalizing the EPA. So they are making the EPA innocuous, virtually helpless in the circumstance. Then, when it comes to the capacity to audit, they are doing nothing to ensure that they can audit it. And so I have no little or no hope that anything of the sort will happen. It is the usual waste talk of Jacques Deo and the president, but there is no evidence that the requisite actions are being taken to ensure that we develop the capacity to do the things we need to do. Without capacity building, how are you going to do what you're promising to do?
All right, Mr. Aubrey Norton, we have promised him just 1 hour, but we will ask that he bear with us for a few more minutes. It's Friday night, I know. He's looking at this time. Mr. Norton, let's touch. I know you've been around, you've been visiting folks in the communities, trying to find out exactly what are some of their concerns. But what about meetings with union representatives, union leaders, and so forth? Consultations with them?
Um, I have appointed, or I should say, not me, the central executive of the party has approved a person with responsibility for industrial relations. A plan has been put together and submitted, and there will be continuous relationship between the trade union and the leadership of the People's National Congress reform. But we want to do it in a structured way, and we want to be able to go to the trade unions with clear proposals as to how we move forward, and we engage them. So the trade unions will be engaged. I'm putting in place the institutional mechanisms to do so. One has to remember, I'm not leader for the party 2 months yet. It's under 2 months. And while we are moving at a fairly quick rate, we also have got to be structured and careful. And in this regard, the trade union movement will be engaged, but it will be based on a clear plan of what we think needs to be done and to be able to hear from them what they think needs to be done. And then we form a consensus and move forward in terms of a PNCR labor union agreement that we can take into government, because I believe we have to put a number of things in place so when we get government, we move smoothly into government and be able to do the things we undertake for the people of Guyana.
All right, let's move away from that and let's talk about your meeting on January 12th with U.S. Ambassador Ms. Sarah Ann Lynch. What was the atmosphere like? And if you care to tell us what were some of the things discussed?
It was extremely cordial. Um, I did say in my New Year's speech that in engaging the diplomatic community, I will not be humbugged by the past. I think we can resolve a number of issues through engagement and dialogue. And my engagement with Ambassador Lynch was very cordial. We placed a number of positions to the United States, the British, the Canadian, and I must submit, we're seeing results from it. I don't want to get into the specificities. When you speak with diplomats, you speak with certain amount of confidentiality. And so I would say generally, we're seeing evidence that they are responsive to our concerns, and we are glad that they are doing that. And we will work with them to ensure we change the situation for the better in Guyana.
All right, a man who served once as a foreign service officer. So he knows his diplomatic language. He knows what to say diplomatically or not. Aubrey Compton Norton, the leader.
I thought I'd been frank there. I don't know what is diplomatic about the language.
No. You're being frank. I'm just reminding the listeners that many years ago, many moons ago, you served as a diplomat representing Guyana before the PPP removed you back in 1992. I just thought I'd remind them of that. Aubrey, let's move on now with just maybe one or two more questions. Maximum.
I noticed the questions are increasing past the 10 o'clock hour, but I'll accommodate it.
Thank you, sir. Maximum leader. I don't want to be a maximum leader. Your words. I don't want to be a maximum leader. How would you respond to folks who might say, you're leader of the PNCR, you're chairman of the APNU AFC, you will eventually, once you get into parliament, and I do hope you do very soon, you will become the leader of the opposition. And then there's a tussle, so to speak, to become leader of the list. Do you see that as being maximum leader, sir?
No,
Being the
maximum.
first, one second, being the first leader of the PNCR to hold all those positions. Over to you, sir.
No, I won't be the first. I wouldn't be the first, but that apart.
Now, who's the first?
Maximum. When I
Who's the
say maximum leader, you know, the early political parties in Guyana were created by Forbes Burnham and Cheddy Jagger. They hold maximum sway and control over the party. The membership believed in them, and so they followed them. I believe the times have changed and that we have a more educated population, we have a lot of leaders that are emerging. What I'm suggesting when I say I wouldn't be a maximum leader, I mean that I'm not going to make decisions on my own and do not be responsive to the concerns of the members of the executive, of the members of the APNU, of the members of the AFC. I am suggesting that I am more in the mode of a consultative type of leadership. Of course, in the final analysis, the buck stops with the leader and you will have to make decisions. So the process leading to those decisions will not be a maximum leader approach in which what the leader says is gospel and should be followed by others. I don't intend to be like that. I intend to be consultative and involve as much people as possible. I also intend to train a number of our young people in the kind of a servant type leader that is in contact with people, understand their interests, represent them, and be reflective of their will rather than imposing my will on them. In essence, that is what I mean.
All right, Mr. Aubrey Norton here. I'd like to ask you this here. What is your relationship like with these gentlemen? Former President David Arthur Granger, former opposition leader Mr. Harmon. When I say your relationship, like, do you guys meet to discuss the way forward and so forth?
I have always had a cordial relationship with Mr. Harmon. In fact, in some regard, in a large regard, I consider him a friend and colleague. And therefore, I do not see us as having fundamental differences. My relationship with former President Grange has always been professional. I served as presidential advisor and I had to engage him in that capacity. I then came to the party leadership again after a hiatus, and we relate, but I wouldn't say it is at the same level that I was with a Desmond Hoyt or a Forbes Burnham or a Robert Corbyn. You would recognize that they all had different styles of leadership and different levels of engagement. And I think whatever relationship exists is a function of the kind of leadership style of the particular person in question.
All right. So any idea when you'll be heading to Parliament? I know that they said that the elders of the party would be meeting to iron out that. Dr. Nicolette Henry has resigned, effective sometime in March, the end of March or so forth. Do you predict going into Parliament soon after and then
Well,
nominated as the
I
opposition leader?
I know the representative of this, Mr. Granger, have been asked to extract my name and ensure I go to Parliament. I'll wait and see. I expect that as representative of the list, if the parties in the coalition suggest that I should be extracted and placed into Parliament, then I anticipate that it will be done. If the impossible occur, and it doesn't, then we have to deal with that at the time.
All right, in your closing remarks, can you say also and offer Guyanese some sort of hope, because we know cost of living is very high throughout the country, and all Guyanese are affected by this, regardless of their political affiliation or ethnic background. That in part of your closing remarks, and also enough effort you think is being done through you as a leader of the party to mend the fraction, to mend the wounds, and to bring all party supporters and members together, sir?
I've said even while I was campaigning that I would get involved in attacking no one, and because I knew in the post-election period that when I became leader, I would have to engage them. I've been engaging all our comrades, talking with them. Don't forget, when you go to an election and the election is over, it takes time to recuperate. Some people are recuperating, some people are engaging, but we are going to move forward as a party. When it comes to hope, I believe that a new life has emerged in Guyana. I believe the PNCR elections, in a very democratic and open fashion, would have reinvigorated the society. Tonight I was on Orange Walk, and two young Indian men came up to me and said to me, "Look, we are dissatisfied with the PPP." One of them said to me, he works in the private sector, and they seem not to want to increase the wages in the private sector. And they discuss a number of issues with me. And they asked me to, as I pursue this goal, ensure if I become president, well, one of them said when, that I honor the things that I promise. And I said to them, I am prepared to do just what I said, including not becoming involved in corruption and seeking to reduce corruption and run a society that is fair, in which all ethnic groups are comfortable. I believe the APNU AFC in office did run Guyana in a fairly just way and treated all Guyanese as equal. And I believe there is hope that the next APNU AFC government will ensure that it delivers resources to the poor, the downtrodden, the disadvantaged, the elderly, single parents, small and micro businesses, and that there's a lot of hope that the future under an APNU AFC government will be bright. We had recommended some action that should have been taken to deal with the inflation that is occurring in the society. However, the PPP didn't respond to it. But as a government, we will be very aware that oil resources tend to result in capital flowing in the direction of the oil and gas sector at the expense of other sectors. And we'll be well willing to put the resources to ensure the other sectors are maintained and expanded. And I believe a future government under the AP and UAFC will serve the people of Guyana. I also believe that a lot of people at present, of all ethnic groups, believe that there is a new opening that would have emerged as a result of the People's National Congress Reform Congress. And so I think there is hope, and Guyanese believe there is hope.
All right, Mr. Aubrey Norton, leader of the PNCR, thank you so much for your time. Also, thank you for not fumbling. Thank you for not stammering. Thank you for not sweating.
And I must,
By the way,
I must guarantee you that I could say valedictorian.
say it, let us hear. Come on.
Valedictorian.
I got you. I got you. And I can tell you, I can pronounce a name very well too. Sue. Sue.
Yeah.
You know.
Well,
Thank you so much, Mr. Aubrey.
one of the things you must know about Sue, one of the things you know about Sue is that it leads to Susu. And Guyanese
Have a
are
good weekend,
Susu.
sir.
Guyanese are Susuing about Sue. Thank you.
All the
Good
best,
evening.
Mr. Norton. Thank you for your time. All right, that's it. 15 minutes over the time. Thanks to Andrew weeks, who is the technical guy, along with Lemon. And thank you all so much. I will ensure that Mr. Aubrey Norton is back on this show. Lots of questions indeed, and so we will have back time soon, very, very soon in the near future. Good evening to all of you. Have a splendid weekend. Thank you all for tuning in. And thanks to Mr. Aubrey Norton, our guest this evening. We'll be back on Monday, this coming Monday. Hopefully, I'm not sure if by then the Vice News report is going to be out to have those guys in Guyana tremble some more, or even more than tremble. We know what's up. When I say we know what's up, we can read between the lines why Jack Geo and Air Finale are panicking. They are panicking indeed. To all of you, have a great weekend. God bless you all. So long.
She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frock, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For cockcrow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cockcrow, dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Cockcrow, dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. All day a back down, me now a come home. Inaga, jackass yard for fetch a load. Cockle Cheyenne, bag over shoulder.
Hello, this is attorney Shellen Washington, owner and founder of the Washington Law Firm, located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. We're specialized in medical malpractice, personal injuries, matrimonial law, and landlord and tenant. If you're in need of legal representation, please give us a call today. The number to call is 718-877-3100. Consultation is free at no cost to you. So call us today to see if we can be of any assistance to your legal needs. Again, the phone number to call us is 718-877-3100.